Every single day, $1.2 billion in crude oil passes through a stretch of water so narrow that a single sunken tanker could paralyze the global economy. This is the Strait of Hormuz. It is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, but the actual shipping lanes are only 2 miles wide. Inside those 2 miles sits the jugular vein of the modern world. If those 2 miles close for even 48 hours, the price of everything in your house changes. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a mathematical reality that the world's largest navies spend billions of dollars every year to prevent. Most people think of oil as a commodity. The banks think of it as the collateral for the entire global financial system. And right now, that collateral is squeezed into a choke point controlled by the most volatile geography on Earth. This is the story of the $4 trillion valve that determines the value of the dollar in your pocket, and why the machine behind it is more fragile than anyone is willing to admit. In 1988, a captain named Rogers made a decision that nearly ignited a global war. He was commanding the USS Vincennes inside the Strait of Hormuz. The heat on the bridge was over 100 degrees. The humidity was thick enough to taste. On his radar screen was an aircraft he believed was a diving Iranian fighter jet. He had less than 4 minutes to decide the fate of his crew and potentially the region. He pushed a button. 2 missiles launched. But it was not a fighter jet. It was Iran Air Flight 655. 290 civilians were killed. The global markets froze in a state of pure shock, because in that moment, the world realized something terrifying. The entire global economy was resting on the judgment of a single human being in a high-pressure room. Since then, the volume of trade through this gap has tripled. Everything about this looks like a local shipping lane. It is not. It is the heart of a machine that never sleeps. And that machine is far more fragile than it appears. To understand the machine, you have to follow the money. 1/5 of the world's total oil consumption passes through this strait every 24 hours. That is 21 million barrels of energy. But the oil is just the surface layer. The real system sits behind it in the sterile offices of London and New York. Specifically, in a building in London that has controlled the seas for 300 years. This is the heart of the maritime insurance world. Every tanker moving through this water is insured through a network of global contracts that are written in blood and gold. And those contracts contain something called automatic trigger clauses. The moment a hull is breached or a state of war is declared, those clauses activate instantly. Bank accounts for the shipping companies freeze. Credit lines are pulled by wary lenders who do not want to be left holding the debt. Trades are cancelled by algorithms before the ship even finishes sinking. The system does not wait for a formal investigation or a diplomatic solution. It reacts in milliseconds, and that reaction ripples through every major bank on Earth. This is the part no one tells you on the evening news. The collapse does not begin with fire in the water. It begins with a digital flatline in the financial system, watching the water from 10,000 miles away. Here is where it gets stranger. The money flowing through this strait does not stay in the Middle East. It builds entire cities thousands of miles away. Look at the skyline of Singapore or the tech hubs of Dubai. Glass towers rising out of nothing but sand and ocean. These are financial hubs fueled by capital that originated as oil moving through a 2-mile corridor. This is the mirror effect, a narrow strip of water quietly funding the progress of the entire planet. But there is a second system operating in the shadows inside this one. It is called the Phantom Fleet. Right now, hundreds of aging tankers are moving through the strait with their transponders turned off. They are carrying sanctioned oil worth billions of dollars to buyers who look the other way. These ships have no standard insurance. They have no real oversight or safety inspections. If one of these ghost ships has a mechanical failure inside the 2-mile lane, the entire valve closes. Legitimate ships cannot move because the path is physically blocked. Contracts cannot settle because the logistics are broken. The global economy is currently gambling its entire stability on ships that technically do not exist. Now picture a single mechanical failure on a 30-year-old rust bucket. One ship drifting sideways in the current. And suddenly, trillions of dollars in global trades are trapped behind it. This is not a theory. This is a known vulnerability that the industry refuses to talk about in public. And it gets worse when you look at the debt. Most of this oil is already sold before it even leaves the ground. It is bought months in advance, using massive amounts of debt and complex derivatives. When the oil stops moving, the debt becomes radioactive. A 1-week closure triggers margin calls across the entire global system. It forces the liquidation of trillions of dollars in positions held by banks and pension funds. This is the margin call scenario. Within 48 hours, the banks realize they cannot collect on their loans. They begin to pull back credit from other sectors: housing, tech, manufacturing. The infection moves from the water to your local bank in less time than it takes to ship a package. But here is the real shock to the system. The machine does not need a physical war to collapse. It only needs the belief that the strait might close. The moment that belief crosses a threshold, the algorithms begin selling automatically. The collapse starts digitally before a single drop of oil is spilled. We have built a system so sensitive that it can self-destruct from fear alone. Now step back and ask a bigger question. Why does this one location matter more than any other place on the map? The answer goes back to 1971 and a room in the White House. When the United States left the gold standard, the dollar should have collapsed. Without gold, there was nothing backing the currency except a promise. But the dollar did not collapse, because the United States made a deal that changed the course of history. They would protect the oil fields and the shipping lanes like the Strait of Hormuz, using the full weight of the world's largest military. In exchange, the world would only buy and sell oil in US dollars. This created the petrodollar. The dollar did not survive because of economic strength. It survived because energy had nowhere else to go. The Strait of Hormuz became the physical anchor of the global currency system. If this water closes, the system underneath the dollar fractures and the promise of the dollar dissolves. This is why a massive military presence exists here today. It is not about democracy or spreading freedom. It is about keeping the valve open to prevent the dollar from returning to its true value. Because if the valve closes, the system does not just slow down, it stops existing. Now consider the new technology in the water. We have turned the 2 miles of the strait into a digital surveillance grid. Thousands of acoustic sensors sit on the ocean floor. Underwater drones patrol the shipping lanes. Satellites track every heat signature in the region. The goal is to provide total awareness. But this awareness has a side effect. It makes the system even more twitchy. Now, a single false positive on a sensor can trigger a global sell-off. We have tried to secure the strait by surrounding it with sensors that are as sensitive as a hair trigger. The very tech meant to save the machine might be the thing that trips the alarm and shuts it down. Now think about your own life in this context. Your groceries in the fridge, the electricity running your computer, the plastic in your phone, and the shoes on your feet. All of it traces back to energy and the logistics of this strait. Every time you spend $1, you are paying a hidden fee to keep this system alive. It is a fee you never agreed to and a fee you never see on a receipt. But the math of the machine is changing. Today, a $20,000 drone can disable a $200 million tanker. The cost of disruption is collapsing while the value of the system remains enormous. This is the fragility point of the 21st century. The moment disruption becomes cheaper than protection, the entire structure breaks. And when it breaks, it does not happen slowly over months. Within 72 hours, the supply chains that feed your city will stall. Fuel shortages will begin at the local pump. Prices will spike by double digits in a single morning. Global confidence will disappear. All of this is triggered by a failure in a place most people will never visit. Most people will hear this information and move on with their day. They will assume the experts have it under control. But now you can see it for yourself. The valve, the mechanism of the insurance dead hand, the dependency of the reserve currency on a single narrow lane. Once you see how the system actually works, you cannot unsee the cracks. The machine is not as stable as the banks want you to believe. It is a $4 trillion tower balanced on 2 miles of water. And that balance is getting harder to maintain every single day. The world was built on this choke point. The question is whether it can survive it. For those who want to see the blueprints of how these systems are actually constructed and where the next choke point is hidden, the expanded intelligence and structural deep dives are waiting. Access the deep files inside the vault. Link below. This is Luxon.